I heard the call sign the night before and didn't think twice about it. It came over the logistics net at 21:40, teen coordination check for the morning's evaluation rotation. Someone on the other end confirmed receipt, gave a time on station, and signed off, Iron Hollow out. I was eating a cold MRE at the admin table, and I wrote the name in the margin of the schedule sheet the same way. I wrote everything that night, mechanically, without looking. I had 22 names on the evaluation roster for the following morning. I had gear to inspect and a pit to drag rake before first light. A call sign on a logistics net meant a person was inbound. That was the whole of my concern. I found out what it meant the next morning. By then, I had already made my first mistake. She was fourth in line at the sign-in table, 061, before the sun had cleared the ridge east of Kessel Flats. The staging area was still blue-gray with early light, and the bleachers along the north fence were filling up. 200 soldiers, some sitting, some standing with coffee, waiting for the day's evaluation to start. The combatives pit was raked smooth. I was proud of that. I had raked it myself. She handed me her intake sheet, and I looked at the weight column, and I made the joke. I am not proud of it, I said. Good luck, in a tone that meant the opposite. She looked at me for exactly 1 second and did not answer. She took the clipboard I held out and walked to the holding area. I watched her go, and then I called the next name. Colonel Pruitt ran the evaluation panel. He had been administering the 3-tier protocol for 4 years, which made him, in his own view, closest thing to an authority on it in the Western theater. He was meticulous about the intake process. When he came to the holding area at 06420 to review the morning's roster, he did what he always did. He read the intake forms in order, weight and height first, and when he reached hers, he stopped. He walked to where she stood waiting, and he said it loud enough for the bleachers to hear. This evaluation is designed for ground combatants in close quarters environments. The protocol requires a physical baseline. He held up the form. You're too small for real close quarters work. Remove yourself from the pit. 200 soldiers heard him say it. I was standing 12 feet away and I said absolutely nothing. She stood still. She had her hands loose at her sides and her chin was level, and she looked at him, the way you look at a chart on a wall, carefully, without emotion, and she said, I'd like to run the evaluation. Pruitt was not accustomed to that answer. He looked at the bleachers, which was a mistake, because the bleachers were watching him now, and he knew it. He said, fine. He said he would allow it because the protocol allowed it. He said it the way a man says something when he is certain the outcome will prove his point for him. The first opponent was a staff sergeant named Halden, 220-62, 4 years of combatives instruction. Had selected the morning's brackets himself, which meant Halden was the opening match by design. A message more than a pairing. Halden shook out his hands and rolled his neck. The bleachers leaned in. 67 seconds. That's how long it lasted. I did not fully understand what I was watching during those 67 seconds. I understood it better later, when I had time to think about the mechanics, the angle she took when Halden advanced, the way she used his reach against him without fighting it directly, the economy of what she did on the ground. There were no wasted movements. It looked simple, which is a thing that only happens when someone has done it so many times it has become involuntary. Halden was controlled, placed, and finished. He stood up, looked at his hands, and walked off. Pruitt said nothing. He marked the result sheet and called the second pairing. The second match went 54 seconds. The third went 81, the longest of the morning, because the third opponent was a gunnery sergeant named Marsh, who knew enough to not let her set the angle, and she had to adjust mid-sequence, which she did, twice, without appearing to rush. By the time Marsh conceded the position, the bleachers had stopped talking. That particular silence in a crowd of 200 soldiers is a specific and recognizable sound. I have heard it at ranges when someone hits a distance nobody believed was on. I have heard it in training bays, when a demonstration goes past what the room thought was possible. I heard it that morning over a dirt pit in the high desert, and I marked it. Between the third and fourth match, a lieutenant I didn't know crossed the pit and handed the brigadier general a folder. The general had been there since 0700, seated in the top row of the bleachers, which I had noticed, and which I had assumed was routine oversight. He opened the folder. He read for perhaps 90 seconds. He turned to a page near the back and he read that page a second time. I could not see his face. From where I was standing, I could see Pruitt's face. It had been handed a copy of the same folder by the same lieutenant, and Pruitt's face, reading it, looked like a man who has just understood a joke that was told at his expense some time ago. The fourth match went 48 seconds. The fourth opponent was a first sergeant with a combat deployment and a combatives instructor certification. A man who had helped administer this same evaluation protocol to 60 soldiers over the preceding 8 months. He knew the 3-tier system intimately. She had authored it. The published methodology, the progression logic, the ground transition sequences. Page 3 of the classified jacket listed the authorship credit, Iron Hollow. The evaluation Pruitt had been running for 4 years. The protocol he considered his own professional domain had been written by the woman he had just told to remove herself from the pit. The first sergeant knew by then too. I could see it in how he entered the fourth match, carefully with a respect that had not been there in the first 3 pairings. It didn't change the outcome. She won the 5th match in 72 seconds, and then she stood in the center of the pit and waited. She was not breathing hard. She had a small cut above her left brow from the 3rd match. Marsh's elbow, a close thing, and she had not touched it. She stood with her hands loose at her sides, the same way she had stood when Pruitt told her to leave, and she looked at nothing in particular. The way someone looks when they are waiting for the next task. The general came down from the bleachers alone. He crossed the open ground between the fence and the pit at a deliberate pace, and when he reached the pit line, he stopped, and he rendered a formal salute. He held it. Behind him, without a command, the bleachers stood. All of them 200 soldiers, some still holding coffee cups, some mid-conversation, and they came to attention and they held it too. Was among them. I was among them. She returned the salute. Then she turned and walked to the sign-in table and picked up the clipboard I had, handed her that morning as a joke. She held it out to me and said, "The evaluation protocol is sound. Your pit prep was excellent." That was everything she said to me. I took the clipboard. I have thought about those 2 sentences many times in the years since, not because they, generous though they were, and not because she owed me anything, because she did not. I think about them because she meant both of them. Protocol was sound. She had written it. The pit was well raked. She had noticed. She was not the kind of person who said things for effect. She said what was accurate, and she stopped. That morning I drove the long way back to the admin building, and I sat in my truck for a while before going in. I had heard her call sign at 2140 the night before, and I had written it in a margin and eaten my MRE and thought nothing of it. She had been in the system for 3 years. The jacket had been there the entire time. The protocol had her name on it. None of us had read past the weight column on the intake sheet. I have read every intake sheet from the beginning of that line to the end since that morning. I take longer than I used to. It costs me maybe 4 minutes on a busy day, which is a reasonable price for the kind of mistake I am not willing to make again.